Now available as paperback and e-reader from the author of Spinsterella, A Strange and Unusual Romance, and Spellbound, A Darker Shade of Black comes from legendary magazine. And you get the conclusion of the Spinsterella trilogy in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers today. In the 4 years I have been writing and promoting the books in the Spinsterella trilogy, I have run into numerous stereotypes regarding Goths and the Goth subculture. And as I listened to people make their generalizations about Goths and the Goth subculture, I began to understand that they're coming from their limited frame of reference. Now, most people only know Goths and the Goth subculture from the movies they watch, the TV shows they watch, or talk shows like Jenny Jones back in the day, which usually presented Goths as some sort of freak or some sort of weirdo. However, as I've done my research into Goths and the Goth subculture on YouTube and other social media sites like Facebook and other websites, I have gotten to know the people of the Goth subculture, and this is why I can say they're some of the nicest people I've ever run into in my life. And one of the reasons why I wrote the books in the Spinsterella trilogy was so that people could get to know the people of the Goth subculture and see them as people just like you and I. Now, when it comes down to these generalizations that people have regarding the Goths and the Goth subculture, again, people are coming from their limited frame of reference. And because they come from their limited frame of reference, they don't know people in the Goth subculture as people. And because they have not gotten to know the people of that subculture, they come up with their own ideas regarding Goths and the Goth subculture. Now, this is something I ran into with my own family when I was promoting Spellbound back in 2016. And I remember on Christmas Eve, my brother and sister were sitting there and they were watching an episode of Frasier. And on this episode of Frasier, they had this Frasier's son who was dressed up like a goth. And they came up with these generalizations saying that, goths are weird, some goths worship the devil. And I made every effort to try to explain to them what goth really was. And goth really is just someone who sees the world from a darker perspective. And they did not believe me no matter what I said. And they came up with generalizations like saying that Goths worship the devil. And I had all the research to back it up to show them that Goths do not worship the devil. That's an old stereotype that many people have regarding Goths and because of their dark appearance. But I knew Goths and I watched over 13,000 hours of video from over 100 or 200 Goths all over the world, and 100% of all those Goths said that Goth has absolutely nothing to do with religion. And this is a stone fact of the Goth subculture that I learned from doing research, watching those thousands of hours of video from hundreds of Goths all over the world, that Goths has nothing to do with religion. Yes, there are some Goths who are Satanists, but there are also Goths who are Christians, also Goths who are Muslim, Goths who are Jewish, and Goths who are agnostic. And in the subculture, religion is something that people see as something personal to them, and it is something they participate in, and not something that they use to judge others on. That's what I've seen as related to the Goth subculture and religion. Now, another stereotype I ran into from one of my family members as I was going down to my father's wake was she was saying that Goths do dress up like that for attention. And again, I could not convince them that to see different. Now, I knew numerous people on the Goth subculture on YouTube and Facebook, and they're not dressing like that for attention. This is how they want to dress themselves. This is what they want to wear. And it's not to get attention from other people. There are Goths who dress in elaborate black outfits, and then there are Goths who wear regular plain clothes that are black. And as I watched numerous videos from people all over the world, people's Goth style varies from person to person. So one person may dress up in period clothes from the 1800s. One person may dress up in vintage clothes from the thrift store, and one person may just put on a pair of black jeans and a t-shirt, and that's their style. What a person wears as goth varies from person to person, and that's what they usually dress up in. And this is something, again, people think that they know about. They think the person is dressing like that for attention, but that's not the case at all. Most people who wear goth clothes and makeup, they're wearing that for themselves because this is how they see themselves on the inside, and that's what they're reflecting on the outside. That's what I've learned over the years as I've done the research and listened to numerous goths, men and women. And what you're seeing is not about getting attention from others, it's how they want to express themselves. Now, another stereotype I run into as related to the goth subculture is one where people are saying that goths are they're drug addicts. And that's another stereotype I know not to be true because I've listened to numerous goths on YouTube, and out of all those goths, only maybe a handful have talked about marijuana use, and that's usually about it. And maybe there was one who talked about drug use like mollies or heroin, but that was out of what, 200-300 people, and that's a generalization I know not to be true regarding people of the subculture. I know that a lot of people in the subculture are not drug users, and this is a stereotype people have regarding people in the subculture, but I know it not to be true because I've interacted with people and they've been open about things. Because again, another thing in the subculture is that people are very open about things. They're very open about things that they do because that's how they do things. Now, another thing that they have as a stereotype is that goths are into self-harm or into suicide, and that's another stereotype I know not to be true. Now, when it comes down to people who self-harm, they're not usually goths, and it can be anyone. So that generalization, as I see it, that's a stereotype that really needs to be dealt with because there are regular people who are into self-harm and self-mutilation, and that has to do with mental health issues, and mental health issues can affect anyone. So to say that goths are just into that, that's not true. And to say goths are suicidal, that's not true either because regular people are suicidal as well. So I know those stereotypes not to be true, and I know that most people out here are struggling with issues, and a lot of goths themselves, they are struggling with a lot of personal stuff, and that was one of the reasons why I made a video talking about where have all the goths gone, because a lot of people wondered what happened to a lot of goths on YouTube, because we used to be, the goth community was a big community on YouTube. However, I started to see a decline in their videos, and one of the things people thought was, that a lot of people were leaving because they couldn't get attention or they were having things going on. But again, I watched their channels on the regular, and I heard many goths say that some of them were having personal issues in their life. A few were upset over what Google did to monetization, and a lot of people, they relied on that money in order to do things like go on trips or create projects, and they had to scale back. And others were discouraged because of these Google policies regarding monetization, so they started scaling back, and others had jobs, so they stopped making videos. And another thing that I ran into regarding stereotypes in the goth subculture was a lot of jealousy, and this is something I ran into from a lot of black women. Now, I've done a lot of videos talking about, black goths and the black community, and there was a lot of anger and jealousy and vitriol directed in some of the comment sections of my videos regarding black goths from black women. I've heard black women make statements saying they look like witches, they look like monsters, and that they're weird. And again, this was really, really cruel things to say about someone who is merely trying to express themselves and wants to express themselves in a way that makes them feel comfortable. And those type of statements, they really are troubling to me, because one of the things I notice in the black community is that black people are told that they cannot express themselves as being goth, and that being goth is a quote-unquote white thing. And that's not the case at all. When it comes down to the goth subculture is an international subculture. And again, we have black goths, Hispanic goths, Puerto Rican goths, Muslim goths, Arab goths, Asian goths, but in the black community, you're told you cannot be goth because goth is considered quote unquote white. And there have been black people with darker perspectives of life and darker perceptions of life, and they're told that they're wrong for expressing themselves. And I believe personally that's wrong, because as a person who is darkly inclined himself, I want to see people have the right to freely express themselves in the black community, because in the black community, what the great irony is that black people fought the hardest for civil rights. However, black people go out of their way to restrict other black people's civil rights and their ability to express themselves freely in the United States of America. And when it comes down to black people, it shouldn't be that way. If a black person can be a thug or a gangster or a hood rat, then why can't they be a goth? Why is it something wrong for them to be a goth, but it's okay for them to fit into the mold of a thug, a gangster, or a hood rat? And those roles were created by white people, but a person deciding to be goth because they want to express their darker perspective of black, or the darker shade of black as I call it in Spellbound, that's considered white. But a person who wants to subscribe to the roles created by mainstream media, such as the thug, the gangster, the hood rat, or the baby mama, that's perfectly fine. And that's one of the things I had a serious issue with as related to many of those black people expressing vitriol against African Americans who wanted to be a part of the goth subculture. And one of the reasons why I wrote the 3 books in the Spinsterella trilogy was to take you into the world of the Matilda Crowley character, her reasons for being an African American goth in Spellbound, and what motivated her, and her growth process as she grew up in the subculture in legendary Mad Matilda, and then later on show her in her 40s as a goth in Spinsterella, showing you that a person can enter the African American person could enter the subculture and then grow up in the subculture, and that it was possible to live the goth lifestyle as an African American, because a lot of people don't know how limited black culture is. And what I wanted to do with these books was open people up so that they could come to a better understanding of what it meant to be an African American goth, and also to give people a better understanding of the goth subculture and the people of the goth subculture. And one of the things that I've learned over the last 4 years about the goth subculture is I've learned to appreciate how great the people of the goth subculture are, because the people of the goth subculture have been very kind to me, they have been very open to me, and they have made every effort to share with me about their subculture so that I could go out here and teach other people about how great the subculture is and how great the people of the subculture were, and to try to shatter many of these stereotypes, because these stereotypes people have about the goth subculture, they dehumanize people, they devalue people, and they degrade people, and they aren't good for people overall. These stereotypes people have regarding the goth subculture, they have to be dealt with, and the only way we can deal with them is by making efforts to go out here and share information about the subculture with others, and to teach people the truth about what's going on behind the goth subculture, and why the reasons why people are goth and what they consider to be goth. So that was those are the core reasons why I wrote the Spinsterella books, and it's one of the reasons why I go out of my way to make goth videos on YouTube and write blogs on my Shawn James Black freelance writer site, and go out here and make efforts to promote the books of the Spinsterella trilogy to give people a broader perspective of the goth subculture, and to learn that African Americans are a part of the goth subculture and the reasons why African Americans, like Matilda Crowley, wanted to be a part of the goth subculture. If you want to learn more about Matilda's story, you can pick up the 3 books in the Spinsterella trilogy, Spinsterella, Spellbound, and Legendary Mag Matilda, on Amazon.com by clicking the link in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.